This lecture serves as our introduction to sexual selection and how it differs from natural selection. There are two basic forms of sexual selection, and the first that we'll cover is intrasexual selection, which usually takes the form of male-male competition. Let's first make sure that we understand the distinctions between natural selection and sexual selection. If you look across animals and even plants, sometimes males and females of the same species are different in size, shape, and color. In general, we call this sexual dimorphism. Specifically, if you're talking about color, it's called sexual dichromatism. So here we have a classic example of a peafowl with the peacock and the peahen on the left. We have frigate birds where males have these bizarre balloon-shaped thoracic pouches. In a lot of mammals that have antlers, the males have antlers and the females don't. And horns, it can vary. In some cases, both species have them, but in some species, it's the males that have the larger horns. And then there can be size differences in many insects. So why? Why are males and females so differently shaped, sized, and showing different color patterns? Is it because males and females have different ecological niches so that ecologically there are some advantages for their differences? Well, in some cases that is the case. So here we have an example of a hummingbird, the purple-throated carib, in which females and males have different bill sizes. And this is associated with the different flowers that they feed on. This is actually beneficial to both individuals of this species because it reduces the amount of competition between males and females when they're foraging in the same habitat. In some insects and other organisms, including some fish, females are considerably bigger than males, and this is oftentimes associated with females that are of larger size can produce more eggs or larger eggs, and so it's associated with fitness associated with large size for females, but males don't really have a benefit for being large in some species. Now we'll see in other cases that it's the reverse. So in a few cases, yeah, you might be able to point out some ecological reasons why males and females are different. But in many cases, the characteristics that are seen in one sex seems not only to not be a good adaptation, it actually may reduce survival. So in other words, we're talking about individuals of one sex, and we'll see that this is usually males, have ecologically costly characters. Classic example of that, again, go back to peafowl. The peacock has this incredibly long train, this tail. It's actually made up of the upper tail coverts, not the tail feathers themselves. But, I mean, if you look at this thing, there's no way that this adds some survival benefit to this individual. It certainly could increase chances of predation, perhaps, but we certainly know that it's really energetically expensive to produce and maintain. Just dragging this thing around all day is difficult and costs extra energy. Females don't have it, so why do males have it? Well, this was actually a challenge to Charles Darwin when he was writing his book on the origin of species. He thought he had a pretty good idea of how natural selection worked until he started looking at these costly traits seen in some species, particularly in the males of these species. And so he came up with a second type of selection that's different from natural selection called sexual selection that does attempt to explain these costly characters. And really what it boils down to is these sexually selected characters are not really concerned with greater survivorship in that aspect of fitness. They're all about increasing mating success. So what we'll find is that males with the more complex trains, these very impressive displays, have greater mating success. And so that is the aspect of fitness that they're increasing. And that's actually the most important aspect of fitness. It doesn't do any good to survive if you don't pass on those genes. So sexual selection explains how a costly trait that may cost you survival for a period of time, it may reduce the time that you live, if you have much higher mating success during this shortened lifetime, that's the only thing that matters. So another way of looking at it, it doesn't matter how long you live in an evolutionary sense if you don't reproduce. Even if you live for a short period of time, if you reproduce more than others of your species, that's going to drive the evolution of your species. That is the highest fitness, and those are the traits associated with higher fitness, despite the fact that they are ecologically costly. So I mentioned that it's males that oftentimes show these exaggerated traits. Why is that? Well, fundamentally, it boils down to some gender asymmetries with regard to initial investment in reproductive potential between males and females. So let's first just look at gamete production. Even at this early stage in the reproductive cycle, females are investing much more than males. And a fundamental reason for this is a pattern of what we call anisogamy, the fact that eggs are much larger than sperm, and that means that females can't produce nearly as many eggs as males can produce sperm. Each egg is extremely valuable, takes a lot of time and energy to produce. Sperm is relatively easy to produce, less costly. And this is going to greatly influence mating tactics and the differences between mating tactics between males and females. So this figure here shows you that across a variety of animals, if you control for body size and you look at the daily expenditure, which is on the y-axis, in the production of gametes, females are always spending a lot more energy each day than males are in gamete production. Once the offspring are produced, in most organisms there isn't any parental care, but when parental care does occur, it's usually done only by the females. The females have more invested in those offspring, and so they oftentimes continue that effort in parental care. Males usually don't provide parental care. The key exception to that are birds. In most bird species, the birds develop so quickly that to have a good shot of their survival, males and females have to work together and show biparental care. But in most cases, if there's parental care, it's female only. So we've got these asymmetries. Females are putting a lot more investment in the initial production and the maintenance of gametes and then the survival of the offspring. So in that case, which gender should have the greatest problem in convincing members of the opposite sex to mate? Males. Females, because of this investment, this much greater investment, are going to be very, very choosy in who they mate with. Males have to do one of two things to increase their mating success. One is they can beat up all the other males in male-male direct competition. They can increase their chance of fertilizing females by making their sperm more likely to fertilize those eggs. We'll call this an indirect form of male-male competition called sperm competition. And another route that males may increase their fitness is they just have to be really convincing. They have to show females, don't mate with that one, mate with me. I'm a much higher individual. You have these really valuable gametes. You don't want to mate with just any Joe Blow. Make sure you mate with me because I'm the highest quality individual here. And if you mate with me, it increases the chance that your offspring will survive and be successful. And so this sets up the different reproductive tactics between males and females. Remember, both males and females have the same evolutionary goal. They want to maximize their fitness. They want to pass on as many copies of their genes as possible and have those survive to reproduce on their own. But for males, the tactics are to be very competitive and be convincing. Be competitive against other males and be convincing to females so that those females will mate with you. Because the way to summarize it, males are going after quantity. The more females they mate with, the more eggs they will be able to fertilize. And that's the typical route for their high fitness. Females, on the other hand, remember they have a very limited supply of eggs, these really valuable eggs. They can't produce nearly as many eggs as males can produce sperm. So, again, don't mate with just any male in the population. You have these limited, valuable resources, so you should be really choosy in who you mate with. So, unlike males, which are going after quantity of mates, females are going after the quality of the mate. Let's give you an example of a species in which we see the different reproductive potentials and the fitnesses of males and females that are using these different tactics. So here we have a rough-skinned newt, and we see that male mating success and the associated reproductive success is typically tied to the number of mates that they have. So you see that most males have absolutely zero mating success. I mean, these are the individuals that are young or lower quality individuals, and they just can't convince females to mate with them. But what we'll see is the number of females that a male has is closely correlated to the number of offspring he produces, his reproductive success. So you have this very strong positive slope. The greater the number of mates that a male has, the greater number of offspring he produces. Now let's contrast that with the females. All females get to mate. There's no problem there. Some of them mate just once, most of them mate a couple of times, but really there's no linkage, or very little linkage. There's a little bit of a positive slope here, but it's much reduced. The number of times, or the number of mates that a female has less to do with the number of offspring that she produces. The key determination of the success in females, in most cases, is not the number that they mate with, but the quality of the male that they mate with. And that explains why there are so few males that mate. There are very few males in the population that are considered the best. And all of the females are selecting one or two of these better individuals, which makes most of the males in the population losers. So I've kind of hinted at the two basic forms of sexual selection. There's intrasexual selection, which usually takes the form of male-male competition, and this can either be direct fighting between males or indirect competition using what's called sperm competition. The other main type of sexual selection is called female choice, or intersexual selection. This is where males are evolving traits to try to convince females of their quality, that they are the highest quality individuals in the population. Well, let's start off by talking about male-male competition. Of the two, male-male competition is usually the easier to understand. Here we typically see in direct male-male competition the evolution of sexually selected characters associated with male combat. They're competing for access to females. Oftentimes a cluster of females, like a harem or a herd of elk, so that the most dominant male can beat up the other males and physically keep them away from the females and can't mate with them. This tends to ensure that this one dominant male fertilizes the majority of the females in his herd. So the type of male-male direct combat characters that can evolve usually involved making you a better fighter. So big size is a common one. Horns, antlers, spurs, any kind of weapon is a potential male-male competition, direct male-male competition trait. Now it's important to realize though that just because they have these weapons, they don't always use them. Usually there's the coevolution of these highly ritualized stereotype of bluffing displays, where males will size each other up. The purpose of this is if they end up having to use their weapons, one or both of them could get really hurt. And so by sizing each other up, you can get a sense of like going, no, I better not take this guy on. He's gonna kick my tail. I'll just back off. Maybe next year I'll be bigger, and then I can assert myself then. So oftentimes you see these stereotype bluffing displays lead to a peaceful resolution of who the winning male is. Now oftentimes if they're pretty evenly matched though, then it escalates to the point where the only way that they can decide who the winner is by fighting. And the stakes for this are huge. Usually, as I showed you in that graph with the newts, if you don't win, you have zero mating success, you have zero fitness. And so in that regard, you weren't even really alive from an evolutionary sense. It didn't make sense how long you live if you're not passing on your genes. And the winners, the few individuals that are winning in these situations, if they can monopolize the matings of many, many females, they have huge fitness. Here's an example of a bird species. These are southern lapwings. This is a picture I took down in Argentina. And these are males displaying to each other. And you see that the weapons that they have are spurs, but not spurs on the legs like you see in chicken and turkey and pheasant. These lapwings have what are called wing spurs, but they're used for the same reason, fighting between males. But here you can see them just puffing themselves up using these stereotype displays, trying to convince the other individuals, don't mess with me. All right, so let's look at a male-male competition trait and show how it differs from females and also how it's ecologically costly. So if you look at marine iguanas, you see that the size that's best for survival is medium size. And so here we have two different islands, and if you look at size classes on the x-axis and their percent of survival, The best survival is kind of an intermediate size. Here on Santa Fe Island for both males and females, in a smaller size generally on this other island here, but again, it's the intermediate size that's the best. So medium size is good. But if you look at the size distribution of males and females on both these islands, you see that females are pretty much going up to that size and then stopping. They don't get much bigger than that kind of intermediate size compared to what the males are really pushing into a large size. Same thing over here. These stars indicate the largest body size in 2 different years that those individuals were able to maintain their weight throughout the year. So indicating that they weren't food stressed. But look at this. The males on both of these islands oftentimes are shooting way past what they can physically support. They're really making their body size an ecologically costly trait. This greatly increases their probability of starvation by the end of the breeding season. So why would they do this? Well, it turns out in this species, the females just mate once and then they're good. They've got enough sperm to produce their offspring. But the males are attempting to mate with as many females as possible. Again, males are going after quantity. Now, to do this, they have to fight for mating territories. And these mating territories are the same as the preferred female basking sites. So the females are coming to these areas to bask because they're eating seaweed, and then they're kind of like cows. They have to crawl out into a sunny place, help to digest that food by sunning. So the females are going to go to these preferred sites. They're going to mate with the preferred males because only the biggest males, the most dominant males, are going to be able to fight and take over these sites. And so if you look at the number of males and their reproductive success, again, most males don't mate at all. But you see that there are a couple of males that have huge reproductive success. I mean, their fitness is just skyrocketing compared to the others, especially look at this one male. And guess what? These were the biggest males in the population. So there is extreme sexual selection pressure to be the largest male in this mating system, despite the ecological costly nature of this trait. You may not live as long as these individuals over here that are smaller in size, but they're not mating, so they're not passing on their genes. Even if you only live a year, you're having really high fitness. So far I've been talking about direct male-male competition, where males are literally fighting and they evolve weapons like body size and horns and antlers and spurs to dominate mating access to females. There's another more subtle form of male-male competition called sperm competition. In sperm competition, it's driven by the fact that in some species, males may not be able to behaviorally control access to a group of females. If females are going to mate with multiple males, then your way of competing with the rival males is through the efficiency of your sperm. So one of the traits associated with sperm competition is sperm quantity. If you have really large testes and this female is mated with a couple of males already, if you can produce just a whole lot more sperm and swamp her reproductive tract with your sperm, it may increase your likelihood of fertilizing most of her eggs. And if you look in primates, testes size is correlated with mating system. So gorillas, the male system is associated with male dominance. The big silverback gorilla can physically control a group of females. Their relative testes size is pretty small. They really don't show much sperm competition. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, have really massive testes compared to the size of their body. And this is because there is a lot of mating between females and multiple males. And so sperm competition is the key indirect way that males can compete with each other. In Mediterranean fruit flies, you can cause the evolution of different levels of sperm competition by setting up laboratory colonies that have different degrees of mate competition. And it's been shown that males who are raised in a situation where there is the potential for sperm competition will ejaculate more into females that they can sense have already mated, compared to those males that are raised in isolation and are living in more of a monogamous situation. That sperm competition isn't an issue then. Another form of sperm competition is the production of killer sperm. It's been shown in some species that have evolved in situations where indirect male-male competition is common, that there are different morphological types of sperm and different behavioral types of sperm. Some sperm are more like torpedoes, and they're not targeting the ova. They're not actually even trying to fertilize the eggs. What they're doing is they're seeking out other sperm in the female reproductive tract that have a different chemical signature as from theirs, and almost treating it like an immune response. And they're actually targeting these sperm and preventing them, those sperm from competing males, from fertilizing these eggs. Another way you can reduce the competition is try to remove the sperm from previously mated males. This is seen in quite a few insects. So damselflies show this. The male genitalia has hooks and scoops and brushes that can remove the previous male's sperm. And in some cases, these are like 90% or more than 90% effective in removing that sperm. And then the male will ejaculate his own sperm into the female's reproductive tract. Another thing that you can do is, if you can't physically keep a male from accessing a female, make it where it's just not going to be effective. So if you can mate with a female and insert what's called a sperm plug or a copulatory plug, then that limits the ability of other male to deposit his sperm in the female's reproductive tract and get access to the eggs. So some spiders do this by breaking off their pedipalps. Squirrels will produce this mucus plug that is thought perhaps to also serve as a sperm plug. Some species have a different tactic, and they simply use their own body as an entire sperm plug. By having prolonged mating, that just limits the capability that another male will be able to mate with a female if you're still in the mating process. Let me just say a few more things about the squirrel copulatory plug. A friend of mine did some research on this, and he did a chemical analysis of this plug. It has a high quantity of carbohydrates and also protein associated with it. It forms this pretty hard plug in the vagina. What he noticed is sometimes the female will leave this copulatory plug in, other times she will pull it out and actually eat it. So I can see some of your faces right now. That may not sound like a good thing, but there are actually some adaptive reasons why this might occur. From the female's perspective, perhaps this is not as much of a copulatory plug as it is what we call a nuptial gift. Remember, this mucus plug is full of carbohydrates and protein. If she is kind of in a lower nutritional state, this nuptial gift, this food gift, may increase her fitness. It may increase the quality of the offspring that she produces. And in this regard, it's also beneficial to that male that just mated with her. So that's one possibility, that this, some cases, may serve as a copulatory plug, but it also may serve more as a nuptial gift. There's another reason why a female might pull this copulatory plug out, though. If she's mated to a low-quality male, she really would rather have a high-quality male mate with her, and so by removing that copulatory plug, it may allow another male subsequently to mate with her and improve the quality of the offspring that she produces eventually. Another form of male-male competition is infanticide. Infanticide is a situation where adults kill offspring. And when a male lion takes over a pride of females, he has a very short time period in which he will have access and control to those females. And if he doesn't get to mate with those females immediately, he may not have any fitness. So when he takes over a pride, if there is a female that's nursing cubs, she's not going to go into estrus. She is not going to be reproductively capable until those cubs are weaned off. So here's the option. The male could just kick back and say, oh, it's going to take you several months to wean these cubs off, but I'll just wait. That's not in the male's best interest. Remember, it's a selfish behavior, but it's one that it will lead to having higher fitness. If he kills those cubs, forces the female to go into estrus sooner, that will increase the chance that he will father more cubs in that pride before he is challenged by another male lion who then takes over the pride. The next video is going to continue our discussion of sexual selection, but move from intrasexual selection to intersexual selection, or how the different sexes interact from a sexual selection point of view. This usually takes the form of female choice.